Hello, everyone, and welcome to Performance Anxiety's 13th online reading event, our second social edition. My name is Tom Snarsky, and I'm happy to be the MC and facilitator of tonight's reading. In case you haven't listened in before, Performance Anxiety is an online reading series hosted via Skype, usually on the third Thursday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. Our last reading before we go back to our regular schedule of being on that third Thursday is actually going to be next week, next Thursday, which is the third Thursday of April, as it happens. If you're a poet or writer who'd be interested in sharing your work at a future event, you're more than welcome to get in touch with us via the Performance Anxiety Twitter account, which is at PerformanceANXT, or by DMing the co-organizers directly. I'm at Tom Snarsky, TomSnarsky on Twitter and Instagram, or you can email me at tomsnarsky@gmail.com. You can also get in touch with Kristin Garth, the other co-organizer of the series, and I'll let you know how when she shares her poems with us first in tonight's lineup. At each of our events, we usually feature around 10 readers who each have up to 5 minutes to share a selection of their writing with us. This week, though, like last week, we're doing things a little bit differently, where we only have 6 readers tonight who have generously agreed to share their work with us. But after each reader, we're going to have an equal period of time to discuss the poems that person has shared. Our readers and myself and a few of our listeners who have joined us will become panelists of a sort, making connections, asking questions, trying desperately to figure out just when to jump in due to the audio delay that we've become accustomed to in the here and now with Zoom meetings and stuff. So without any further ado, I'm really excited to introduce, obviously, our first reader, who's the co-organizer of Performance Anxiety, Kristin Garth. Kristin Garth is a pushcart, Best of the Net, and Riesling-nominated sonnet stalker. Her sonnets have stalked journals like Glass, Yes, 521, Luna Luna, and more. She's the author of 15 books of poetry, including Pink Plastic House and Shut Your Eyes, Succubi from Maverick Duck Press, Crow Carriage and Candy Cigarette Woman Child Noir from the Hedgehog Poetry Press, Flutter, Southern Gothic Fever Dream from Twisted Press, and The Meadow, forthcoming from APEP Publications. APEP Publications, led by Jeremy Galke, who's on the call with us tonight. She's the founder of Pink Plastic House, a tiny journal, and co-founder of this very online reading series, Performance Anxiety. Thanks as always, Kristin, for being here, and I look forward to not only hearing but also discussing your poems.
Well, I'm going to read a few poems, but I'm going to say a few things too. Tonight I'm not just going to read the poems, but since I was on video, I was going to show you how long I've been working on The Meadow, which is a book about my BDSM experiences when I was a lot younger. And to show you how much younger I was, this is the first publication I ever had, which was No Other Tribute, Erotic Tales of Women in Submission. And it was published in 1995. And that was my only poem for 20 years that I had published, because I didn't actually even have this poem put up for publication. My Dom at the time, who we weren't gonna like end up together, it wasn't working out. He liked this poem though that I wrote him, trying to explain why I like things differently than he did, and he sent it off to this anthology. And because of that, for so many years, I believed in myself as a writer, even though I wasn't actively courageous enough to be sending out work and publishing. And then now, since I have, in 3 years, I have like almost 600 publications. I credit this man a lot, for, planting that in my psyche. And so even though this is a very elementary Kristin Garth sonnet, I'm going to read it. It's in The Meadow. And then I'll read one that's related to it. Homecoming. In me there is some fight, and once you found it, late at night, when arms and legs do flail and speak without the words I lack, the sound of leather cracking makes me jump and wail with delight. Daddy, do you hear me scream? And can you see the tears that reach my chin? And how my head did turn to catch the gleam of eyes that touch me twice and then again, but arms still hit? And will you call me please, your little girl? And in the place you cannot see, my anger lives on bended knees. And will you take it out so I can stand, and set me free to run in fields alone, then pull me back to bring me safely home? And I wrote that poem about a lot of things, about age play and about playing with pain, which I was with a man who was more of a swinger, and he didn't understand why anybody would ever want to cry, and didn't like that at all. And for me, as a child who had been abused, it was something that I wasn't allowed to show negative emotions. I wasn't allowed to do those things. So this was all very cathartic. That's part of why I was even involved in BDSM. So anyway, there's a connection though, because this poem introduced me to my second Dom, who had a girlfriend who was also in this book, not writing for the same thing I was writing, but you'll hear in the sonnet, she was writing about a fisting experience she had. But he was polyamorous, and so when we first met each other, he's like, "Oh, by the way, you two are in the same book." And that was kind of a funny experience. But here is LaGuardia and why I wore a flight attendant uniform today. Okay. He is your pinstripe stalker at the gate, many-skirted traveler who hesitates, hides to spy how suburban pale thighs vibrate. Favorite flavor is you, terrified. He licks it from your lips. Big city quips rebuild your confidence. He leads you to a waiting car. Though you flew here for whips, already scarred, this city makes you new again, as small as you have ever been. Across his lap, back seat driven by his girlfriend, he speaks of a book you're both in. Your verse whips hers fisting experience. Over shoulder, she wiggles a small hand. You're not in Wonderland, you understand. And then I wrote this about when we went kind of back at their house, and also just me learning about polyamory, and just like any kind of relationship has its complications, and just because someone consents and says, "Oh yeah, I'm fine with this," they have, there's insecurities and everything else too, and because she lived with him, and I was the visitor, part of her duties were to show me around this house and the rules, and she took advantage of that to tell me some bad rules, and I'm going to go ahead and read the poem so I won't go over my time. But this is the rules of the house. His towel's black, yours are the red. She gives a tour that ends inside a bed. New Dom's live-in girlfriend instructed to show. Missives visiting submissive should know. Welcomes with pats of percale, dainty hand. Present yourself servile to spread-leg demands. The rule of this house, you obey all. Submit to her fingers, shaved cunt baby doll. He'll cite this demeanor, passivity, as cause for escalating hostilities. Her hatred predates this, because emerging red towel to his obscenities, first time he breaks your skin atop this bed, lying, she says, I told her. His are the red. And anyway, thank you so much for listening. And if you are interested in this book, you can order it now at APEP Publications, and it's the Meadow, and also at my link in my profile on Instagram or my pinned tweet on Twitter at Lola and Jolie. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kristin, for getting us started tonight for the second social edition. And I just want to open the floor to anybody who wants to share thoughts, reactions, comments, things that are just going through your mind, having heard Kristin's poems. And well, about 5 minutes, but again, there's no way I'm going to stop poetry discussion from happening. So jump right in.
I'll start. I wanted to show everyone the Meadow. This is what I'm printing actually right now, and these will go out Monday, but they are on the website for pre-order. But yeah, this book in particular was interesting to me because of the perspective on BDSM in the culture, and almost the kind of like blue velvet underbelly to it, that it's not always about empowerment or about anything like that. That there's this real honest kind of darkness in it, and also liberation that's found in an unexpected place. But it's an outsider story, and that's really what I have always loved, is outsider stories, and this book is full of them. And Kristin Garth has rescued the sonnet for me too. I mean, she really has dutifully uh, uh, attached her work to the sonnet form, and that's amazing to me. But yeah, that's like, I'm very happy with this book, and I'm excited for everyone else to read it. And these performances Kristen's been doing are great, but like the experience of reading this book is meandering and weird and sexy and wonderful. It's just like there's a great kind of arc and a great kind of flow as you weave in and out of the meadow. But anyway, I'm talking too much. Someone else go ahead.
Yeah, that was again Jeremy Gawke of APEP Publications, who will be sending literally your copy of the book if you pre-order it or order it on Monday. Other folks thinking and having ideas relating to the poems that Kristin shared? I also have gotten to like review this book in Empty Mirror not too long ago, and it's been really cool to see. Like, I think that Jeremy mentioned the way that it sort of reterritorializes or reconfigures the sonnet as a form, which is like something that Kristin's work has been doing for a long time in a really cool way. But I also think that just the way that like I've been in a reading group for the philosopher Gilles Deleuze for a long time, like a group of us in the Boston area who've been kind of working our way through his books, and he has a great book on Ernst Sascha Masok, which I'm definitely pronouncing wrong, like the guy who wrote Venus in Furs. And that book is so much about like the way that perhaps masochism, instead of being viewed as just like the other side or the recipient of pain or whatever, is actually a really generative position. It can be a way of like reconfiguring sort of a world, or of not just being a will to power like philosophy has been obsessed with since Nietzsche, but like being a way to transform power or make it work for you or make it work within your kind of logic of sensibility. And like I think that the poems that you share have always kind of done that. They've taken this like extreme emotional or physical valence and turned them into something that like it has music, which is like a really interesting transmutation, especially when you think of like the sonnet as a form being like another constraint. So yeah, that's just something that's on my mind, and I wonder if people have similar thoughts or other connections they want to make as we approach around our last minute of discussion of Kristin's work.
Yeah, I like that you said that about because that's something that's really important to me, is that people think that submission is passive, and that if there's like one thing that I am definitely, trying to like change people's minds about is that like, I sought this out very actively, and I was very, determined, and I went through a lot of experiences I didn't like, and I mean, there's a lot. It's a very active, autonomous thing for me.
Yeah, I just wanted to open the floor. Have any last words about Kristin's work before we move to our second reader? All right, so I just want to remind everybody that, again, that's Kristin's book, The Meadow, which is available from APEP Publications starting on Monday. So you can find it at apeppublications.com. And you can also find any other information about Kristin's work at her website, Kristin, Kristin, Garth.com. And you can find her, like she mentioned, on Twitter and I think Instagram as well, at Lola, Lola, and Jolie, Jolie. So again, thank you as always, Kristin, for organizing this reading and also sharing your poems with us. I'm really excited to introduce our second reader tonight, a dear friend of mine whose poems I look forward to reading and hearing all the time, whose intro got rudely interrupted by my duck timer, Joe Ianni. And Joe is a poet and performance artist from Toronto. I'm really excited to hear his work because he and I have been in a class on Rilke recently, just discussing stuff in general, and I can't wait to hear what particular transmutations of all this we're going to hear this evening. Joe, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Kristin. I'm just going to read my poems. They don't have titles. I'll let the pauses in between kind of give a guide to where they start and stop. To yourself and only yourself, skies calm interruptions, trapped in gaze, how? They try to take me where they want to go. A couple elegies ago, I felt shiny weird, making scrambled eggs. Why would I not say thank you? Road builders, earned in spades, dream of dreams. Somehow I knew if I stayed close, sleepy, open, morning, I noticed too the rhythm of my belly. Seagulls kicking around the can like they used to play soccer. Smaller, nameless birds chuckle on amongst each other only if you listen. They speak a whole different language, different roots, but some distant stop sign round the corner seems to now mean avoid. Racist to an end where that gap in meeting has an address. In overtime, trees, 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 wind. I wanted to find moss. Looked up gravure. Why that? Achy feeling image. Sap. Running into the next room to see the timer remit of a cure. There's a half step between womb, tomb. It's home. If we, reaching out, hold on a second. Secretly, your hand fills in my hand on how a hand feels. You'll find there's no perfectly, only things made purposely. I had an idea of what was. Then when what was wasn't, I had another idea, a dangerous idea. It read, caution, do not enter, no trespassing, private property. I turned round, sun, sky, ladle, whale, clouds, pine cones on the evergreen. A bird that wasn't a bird, but plastic, caught in the breeze. In a tree. Around spring. Just before. Can't I be two things? At least? Monday, and whatever Sunday was. Settled on a color which could change in your beloved eye, deepen on a light's angular riff as it passes an infinite loop, depending on clouds. Red, redder, bright, bright orange, yellow, blue? Yeah. All that and lavender too. Dreamy lamplight night, where I was with you. We sat and read candle flame, flicker, hanging around perfect, slippery, as an evening can be. Remembered, done, wish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing those poems with us tonight. And I was like a delay unmuting my mic because I was like typing so many quotes from those things. So there was a lot in what Joe shared with us, these poems that were punctuated by these little breaths. And I just want to open the floor to folks who are responding. As our first Skype chat where people were throwing some quotes out there. So what are people thinking? Also, I should mention that I may have tyrannically muted you because, like my duck timer, I may have not wanted background noise to have happened, even though I just did it twice to Joe. So if you find yourself muted, feel free to unmute yourself and jump right in.
The first piece, Joe, reminded me a lot of Dufu. Do you know Dufu at all?
I do. I'm not like familiar with the work, but I am familiar with the poet.
Yeah, there's a really succinct way that you structure your lines and the breath is a lot like Dufu and Levi, and that kind of like, you know, I don't know, like 10th century, 12th century Chinese poetry. I really, really enjoyed that.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you.
It's really cool. Other folks have thoughts, allusions, other things that brings to mind for them?
I have a question.
Sure.
So you didn't title any of your poems, and I'm just curious why this is, because I find myself sometimes struggling to figure out the titles for my stories and my work. So I'm always interested in choice about title, whether you give one or not. So I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I don't know. Titles are sometimes strange. They can sometimes keep the poem too boxed in for me. They provide like maybe too much of a frame. Um, I really would like if people would kind of pick out titles themselves, like, oh, that poem. I remember that poem with the seagull. And that would be like title enough for me that the reader could do that. I had that happen once at a reading where I was like, I don't know the title of this. And somebody was like, call it this. And I was like, cool, that's the title then. So I think it's an opportunity. I hope that it presents itself as an opportunity for people to title it themselves.
Yeah, I love thinking of it that way, letting the audience come up with their own title for it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you.
Yeah, that made me think of one of the lines from, I think, the Seagull poem, which is there's this moment where you said, only if you listen. And I was thinking about that in light of the fact that when you present a poem as like just a series of words punctuated pretty much only by silences, it makes the listening like this kind of interesting almost like thing for the reader to think through or think with you through. Like they get to hear it and they also get to decide. They make certain decisions about like where would the lines have been or where would the poem have ended or one part of the poem have ended. And I think that's just really cool because I think we're so used to now seeing poems fly through screens and be kind of pretty much only ocular. Like they're things that we see and then we don't necessarily oralize or like bring into speech or bring into breath. And I think that's a really cool way to think about listening as like a sort of way the reader can participate and make some decisions, even if they were different than the decision the poet might have made.
Yeah, I think that's great, Tom. You're like a good reader of mine, and I think that you understand that like part of it is about interaction. You're always interacting. You're always here. I want the reader to feel here when I'm giving them a poem.
Yeah. Anybody else make other listening decisions that they want to share or things? I like that. I didn't even think about it. I didn't say it, but then Jessica shared a question. I'm like, yeah, questions are totally cool too. I also feel like it's kind of appropriate to mention, like Joe and I have shared some experiences in poetry since the beginning of this social distancing era where we've been like, for example, Ariana Rines had a class on Roca's Do We Know Elegies that we both participated in. And I've really appreciated, Joe, your work where you take kind of these experiences of listening, which is, and whether it's a class or a discussion or what we're doing even right now, maybe, I don't know if you've got your notebook out or not, but like you kind of turn these into listening poems. I forget if you called them listening poems exactly, but like these poem listenings where they're almost acts of witness in a way. And like, I think that in some sense, kind of all poetry does that with language, but also just the way that like you can feel it when you've like been in this experience or talked about this thing with a person, or you recognize language from a particular poem or poet. Like, I'm wondering too if other people have had that experience before, where like something that you've been in or heard or listened to has turned into a poem or a piece for you, and what that process has been like.
Yeah, I love listening to poets, and like my poems are sort of celebrations of that listening. I hope. I once made a poem that literally it was about listening to my friend JC read a poem, and I was like, the beginning of the poem was, the best poem I ever wrote was listening to JC, was while listening to JC, and then I forgot what the rest of the poem was. And you just got listening to JC.
That's beautiful. The poem has
Yeah,
active witness.
I just like listening to your voice when you read too. You have a great reading voice.
Thanks, Kristen. It's good to hear everybody read. I love hearing people's voices.
Yeah, I just want to open the floor again to any last thoughts, things that people are thinking, lines of Joe's that are burned into their brain that they want to share before we introduce our next reader. I have plenty of those. They're scrivened in my document now.
I wouldn't mind
Yeah.
just saying one thing. Just because when I listen to poems, I often just listen for, well, it's not that I listen for it, but certain lines really will stick out. And I did really appreciate that line where he said, "Your hand fills in my hand on how a hand feels." It had a nice kind of like playfulness to it, but it also had like, I thought, a nice little double meaning to it as well.
Yeah, that's a delightful, like the Sonics, and I was like kind of in what is that flight? Is it Flight of the Valkyries where we have trees, 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 wind, trees, 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 wind? That's wrong. It's not. That's not Flight of the Valkyries, but whatever it is, I was like, yep, the sound makes this possible. And yeah, I love Joe's work so much. And if you also loved Joe's work and you want to find more of it, you can find Joe on Twitter and on Instagram at WTF is a poet, all one word. And Joe, I'm looking forward to hearing more of your work in the future and also hearing your thoughts on our remaining readers' work. So thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you all so much. Please find me. I love talking about poems with people.
Yeah, I can attest that if you message Joe about poetry, he will respond, and it will be a great conversation. So please do that. And I would love to introduce our next reader, who I am really excited to get to know her work, Christina Rosso. Christina Rosso is a writer and bookstore owner living in South Philadelphia with her bearded husband and rescue pup. Her debut collection, She is a Beast, is forthcoming from APEP Publications, along with Kristin's The Meadow. And her writing has been featured in 521 Magazine, Digging Through the Fat, Ellipsis Zine, and more. Christina, thank you so much for being with us tonight. More APEP representation, and take it away.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Like you said, my debut collection, She is a Beast, is currently available for pre-orders through APEP Publications. This is a collection of feminist fairy tales. Some of them are reimaginings of the stories that we know and love, like Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella, and some are original. So the piece that I'm going to be reading, just an excerpt for you guys tonight, is a reimagining of Cinderella, and it's called A Husband by Midnight. I hope you enjoy it. You've heard my story. My kind, beautiful mother died, leaving her faithful, doting husband, my father, with a hole in his heart. Shortly thereafter, a wicked woman filled that hole as though it were the inside of a cake, bringing her 2 spoiled daughters as cherries on top. But nothing about these women was sweet. 3 months after they came to live with us, my father began to cough blood. 3 months later, he was dead. Before my father was buried in the snow-covered ground, my stepmother and stepsisters changed my status from a maiden to a chambermaid. Then they changed my name to Cinderella after the ashy embers left in the bottom of the fireplace in the kitchen, my new workspace and bedroom. These women saw me as a field mouse, something tiny and meek, easy to control or crush. I was just a thing to them, a dirty house wench, an ungrateful stepdaughter and sister, and their ticket to getting their grimy hands on jewels and land. My weak, idiotic father left his entire fortune to them. He couldn't see that they were winter, and I spring. I was born in early April, a month where a thick blanket is all that's needed on cooler mornings. I was born with a different name, one that resembled a flower instead of dying flame. I bet you didn't know that. These vultures may have taken my agency and my fortune, but they have nothing to do with my future. I don't need their money to plan my escape. I've learned there are 2 kinds of currency in this world, gold and chastity. I no longer have the former, but I can use the latter to my advantage. I am as pure as ladies come. The only man I've ever known was my father, and his flesh barely ever brushed mine. Before his frequent trips for work, he would timidly peck my forehead before hurrying away. I am untouched by man, you see. I am pure as a fresh snowfall, and this will get me far, or at the very least far enough away from the cackling witches who've taken over the place I once considered home. Society likes to say it always knows a chaste girl, but how can it tell what has gone on beneath my skirts? Society likes to think of itself as all-powerful, yet really it receives its breath from the hens and roosters clucking and yelling at parties, pubs, and brothels. It knows only what it hears, and everyone knows chickens run around with their heads cut off. I am chaste because I come from good breeding, fortune, and my name has never been uttered in gossip circles unless in pity for my father remarrying so soon after my mother's untimely passing. It's true, I haven't had many opportunities to tarnish my name and that my virginity is intact. Yet there's nothing chaste about my soul. You have to be devoid of propriety to become business savvy. Tonight, I am at a ball. You probably have in mind the fable society has told you. A maiden goes to a dance where she falls in love with a handsome prince who will take her away from her miserable life of servitude. I'm afraid that's just a bedtime story, a wish for a better, happier world. This evening will not be about falling in love or escaping for a night. There is no fairy godmother or glass slipper in this story. I am the only one who is going to save myself. Tonight is my chance to escape for eternity, leaving this life in the dust. Tonight I will find a husband and sell my virginity to the highest bidder. And that is where I will leave you guys off on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for the excerpt from. Can you remind us of the title of that, of your?
This story is A Husband by Midnight.
Husband by Midnight. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, that's from Jessica's forthcoming book from APEP Publications called She is a Beast. So let's open the floor if folks want to respond to what it's like to read Cinderella in the COVID era, in this retelling, and other thoughts, connections people are making. Anything you'd like to share, please take the floor.
I also have a copy of this book to show you guys. I promise this isn't just an APEP commercial, but this is She is a Beast. And the story she just read is one of my favorites in the collection, along with the Faux Fairy Tale, which is kind of along the same lines of basically Sleeping Beauty, but just leaving the fuck alone kind of thing. It's a beautiful collection. It's that one in particular is just brutal, like, and relentless. And when I was growing up, my mom would always talk about like the princess and the fairy tale, and she always talked about them as survival stories. And this book is like she's presented the way that these women have survived and the way that these women have, stayed true to themselves, escaped, or just figured out how to make it work within the horror that they're involved in. But it's a great collection. It's our first fiction that we've done, and it's our actually connected to, you guys are talking about Rilke earlier. The design is inspired by Versacre magazine, which is, he had a bunch of poems he frequently in Versacre magazine. It's just this beautiful Art Nouveau thing that I kind of tried to capture. But check it out. Check Christina out. This is a wonderful. I'll just show you a few things since we have video. But this is this it is, and the Rapunzel, her story that she just did, The Husband by Midnight, is here. That's very, very happy with this, and always love to hear Christina read.
Thanks, Jeremy. Jeremy did some really, really beautiful illustrations throughout the book, one for every story. So definitely something special to check out.
Yeah, this looks like a beautiful object. Thanks for sharing a little sneak peek of it, both the book and the excerpt that you read. I'm wondering if you can share any of your influences in writing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So my main influence for most of my work, because almost all of my work exclusively deals with feminist fairy tales and mythology, is Angela Carter. So I did a dual master's degree at Arcadia University, a master's in literature with a focus on fairy tales, and an MFA in creative writing. And while I was in that program, I found The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, who really pioneered the idea of the feminist fairy tale when that book was published in 1979, and it was the first time that we were getting like the raw sexual and violent content of these stories just laid out, and giving the female characters the opportunity to actually have things like sexuality and agency and desire. So when I found that collection, it kind of opened this whole world to me. Some other wonderful, more contemporary writers in this genre are Daniel Mallory Ortberg, Nikita Gill, Emma Donahue. They all have fantastic collections that you should check out.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks so much, Christina, for that list of influences and other connections that people are making, things that, like, in my head, it's really an amazing thing to read a retelling of Cinderella in this moment of social distancing, where so many folks may be in homes or in places where they're in there and they can't leave, but they might not feel safe. Or like I was stuck with the way that you phrased like this line of the people in the house with Cinderella sort of changed her status, like they saw her as a field mouse, and the way that kind of like you almost uses the language of like social media of like the status update or whatever, but like shows the way in which other people can suddenly gain this disproportionate power in this like tight enclosure. I'm wondering if other folks as we get to our last minute or so of discussing Christina's work, like any connections with what it's like to sort of be in the world now, or things that you're thinking about in the here and now. Or of course, Christina, if you'd like to speak to that at all. Yeah.
So something that's been really interesting as I've been working on some newer reimagined fairy tales during COVID is that I'm finding that working in the parameters where I can give these female characters control of the situation they're in, and their own version of a happy ending, which is usually escaping the confines of the patriarchy, that makes me feel like I have a little bit of power and control, because I can't control what's happening, but I can, for instance, if a character like Rapunzel is physically trapped in a tower, I can get her out of it, and it feels like I've accomplished something that I can't accomplish in my real life right now because I'm literally trapped in my house. So it's just an interesting way that I've been thinking about fairy tales in my writing and how it can be very cathartic.
Yeah, thank you. That's an amazing way of thinking about, the power of writing in this moment. I just want to open the floor again one more time to last thoughts that folks might have before we introduce our next reader. Any other last words for Christina?
I wanted to maybe, I don't know if I'll get to a question, but I do really love the idea of reformatting the fairy tale. These are long-standing structures that have really helped people throughout the course of time. And you always wonder what were the influences behind those original fairy tales. And I think it's really wonderful to have a moment here where we have a fairy tale writer in our presence who's writing for a future to come. I guess my question sort of comes in the sense that I've been thinking about that in terms of mythology. And I'm wondering about your experience of these are like long-standing fairy tales that have a lot of power. They have an incredible amount of power. And how do you feel writing through that power and with that power? Because I'm experiencing that myself when I try to touch with mythology at times.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's always so fun to come to these stories, and I find that there are certain ones that I continually return to. Beauty and the Beast, for instance, is something that I just keep rewriting, and it's always a joy to come back to these stories that I've known my whole life, and there's a comfort in it. And then also, I feel like there is this surge of power or delight in the fact that I can be in the reins of the story and I can control what happens to these people. one of my professors in grad school, when I was complaining about a feminist reimagining we were discussing, and I was like, why did this character do this? I hate this. It was so good up until then. She said, if you don't like the version, write your own. And that has been a very empowering and inspiring sentiment for me. And I always tell, I just recently taught a feminist fairy tale writing course. And that's what I say to my students, you know, if you're not happy with the version of it, well, why don't you tell your own? And I think that that's a really empowering element.
That's a really beautiful note to end the discussion on. And I just want to remind everyone that, again, that was Christina Rosso's book and an excerpt from a tale in her book, She is a Beast, out very soon from APEP Publications. So you can find more of Christina's work at Christina, Christina-Rosso, Rosso.com, or you can find her on Twitter at Rosso_Christina. Also, she is, again, a bookstore owner in South Philly. So you can find out more about her bookstore if you're in the Philly area at anovelideaphilly.com. So thanks so much, Christina, for being with us and for sharing. That was so awesome. And I'm really excited to move to the second half of our reading order tonight with someone who participated as a discussion / panelist last week, and whose poems I'm really excited to hear, Hannah Lamb Vines. So Hannah Lamb Vines is currently sheltering in place in Oakland, California. She writes stories, poems, and letters about being a human with a body in a world made of screens. You can find a list of her publications at neutralspaces.co/lambvines, LAMBVINES, Giacomo Pope's wonderful project. So thank you so much, Hannah, for being with us for a second week in a row, and I'm really excited to hear your work tonight.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to start with Carnal Delights 1. Somebody stole me a fresh fig. Purple plump as a suckling pig. Sweet seed pulp drip between my teeth. My tongue run through flesh and flour. Heartbeat. Kilometers per hour. Overpower from beneath. Carnal Delights 6. So the woman saw the fig, and the woman saw the wasp, and the woman, seeing the fig and the wasp, learned to garden. And the woman was like, it is good. And it was. And the man who owned the garden saw the woman, and the man who owned the garden saw the tree. And the man, seeing the food and the woman, felt emasculated. And the man was like, fuck. If the woman can feed herself, what good am I even? And it was. And the men who own the world got together, and the men who own the world smoked cigars, and the men who own the world wore leather over their leaves, which were fig. And the men were like, dude, bro, if the woman can feed herself, will she still want to fuck us good? So it was then that the men closed off the commons with muddy trenches and thorny hedges and turned the garden into a plantation. And it was then that the men made up their god, who wore the sky on his shoulders and said shit like, you fucking slut, whore, snake, bitch, crawl in the dirt and raise babies in my honor. What do you think this is? A fucking fig-eating garden party? And it was. bootleg.roughcut.so8.seriesfinale.mp4. Forget it. Bodies like limbs of the same, no responsibilities, no propagation. Can I collect interest on green buds without blossoms? Forget it. I don't care about money, about books we didn't keep. I don't care. We didn't keep the things we couldn't. Believe it. I don't care. Forget it. I don't want repayment. I want to forget it. This is the last one. All the times I could have said, I'm done. I can't. I'm out. I quit. I'm sorry. I can't. That's it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for these poems. They punched incredibly. Again, I'm like typing furiously in my document, trying to just keep all these quotes aligned. And I want to open the floor to anybody who has thoughts, feelings, connections to things Hannah shared. Go right ahead, please.
I say, Can I say two very general? In the first poem, I really loved the wordplay, and all the imagery. It was kind of just, it was giving me like tingles. It's like makes you want to dance almost. And then in the second one, I just loved the reimagining of the sort of like Genesis, or is that right? Yeah, the Genesis kind of story. I kind of just like playing with those ideas on my own. And I thought you presented that really, really effectively with a lot of humor and a lot of punch to it. It was fun. I liked it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I'm going to chime in.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to chime in and say I also agree. I love just the idea of retelling Genesis, of retelling a beginning. I also love the use of the declarative. And if you had anything to share about that, like there's so many of these declarative statements in the work, it seems, and I love them, and I love them in other people's work, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and why use them, and why say them.
Yeah, so in Carnal Delight 6 in particular, I think I had read some of Genesis before writing this, and Genesis, the King James translation uses a lot of declarative statements. It's telling it the way it is. I later read Caliban and the Witch by Sylvia Federici, which is a really great feminist reading of primitive accumulation, and I saw a lot of connections between the story of Genesis and what was described in Caliban and the Witch. And so I wanted to use that language to just tell what I saw, I guess. I do sometimes get nervous about using declarative statements because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm imposing my perspective on them. But as Joan Didion has said, writing is aggressive. And I think that's part of the risk you take when you decide to write anything.
That's a really cool thing to hear, and it's cool to think about in conversation with the sort of movements of. I think the phrase that I wrote down first and that I put in the Skype chat was the men closed off the commons. So sort of like there's this closing off that is happening in the poems, but that also the poems are sort of pushing back against, right? Like the male figures in this retelling are doing lots of like no trespass. They're doing like I think of back to Joe's poem of like the no trespassing, the stay off the grass sort of a thing, and like suddenly in tracing the like in showing that they're doing that, in like creating a recognition that that's what's happening, that they're cutting off the commons, they're not allowing all this stuff, like suddenly a liberatory potential kind of happens, and I think that's a really cool way of thinking about like the aggression that's happening in writing, is like not letting any of this like negation go unstated or go unchallenged. Like that's a really beautiful gesture that we saw, I feel like, a lot in those poems, and that punched really hard.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's one thing about censorship, is that it states itself, and in stating itself, it gives something to be objected to. So it sets itself up for a fight, and a fight is winnable by either side, potentially.
I also really like Carnal Delight 6. I heard Genesis. I also heard Popol Vuh and Babylonian mythology, like this kind of retelling of the same story, but inserting, your relevant angle, essentially. And I really love the way that you structured the language, the mix of those declarative statements, like you said, and those very, very vernacular, modern kind of explosions. And excellent. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
The dude bro rings in the ear. It's like, so again, I just want to thank you, Hannah, for participating as a conversationalist last week and then as a reader this week. Again, that was Hannah Lamb Vines, who is on Twitter at embarrassed forever, EMBARRESSED 4 EVR. And also don't miss Hannah's poem that's coming out in the upcoming print issue number 58 of Columbia Journal. You can find it at columbiajournal.org/pre-issue-58. So again, thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us. And I'm really excited to introduce our second to last penultimate reader, Jessica Drake Thomas. So Jessica Drake Thomas is a poet, fiction writer, and blogger. She's the author of Burials, a collection of poems that's forthcoming later this year in 2020. And her work has been featured in Plowshares, Pussy Magic, Coffin Bell Journal, 3 Drops from Her Cauldron, and other places. So thank you so much, Jessica, for being with us tonight. Take it away.
All right. This is a selection of pieces from Burials. The first one is called Atropos. You may first learn that there is no beginning, no end, the language told by knots and wool yarn. If only reading were simple, a pendulum poised above a map, the fall of bones, leaves, petals opening to reveal in time a fully blown rose. You must learn how to proceed by touch, how the yarn is rough against the pads of your fingers. Feel the thick and thin, read, hand closed to hide the scar of an oath kept and never revealed. A chest rising and falling beneath pressed sheets. Slowly now, turn the strands to feel a different angle. Find more knots, old patterns, questions, no answers. Blind one, how does it feel to be immortal, to have power but no agency? There's something beautiful about attending the mortal end. Pull out your silver scissors, make the final cut. Listen, the death rattle. The next piece is called White Silklined Casket. Dirt rained down on the lid, drumming like an afternoon rain, a steady tap of fingers slowly subsiding in their urgency. I don't know who dug this grave. It must have been me. My hands are mud-caked as I clasp them over my chest. I'm alone now, with the only thing that I had feared, silence. When you left, you did not wrap a red string around my finger. Now there is no bell to tell those at the surface that I'm down here still breathing. This wasn't how I wanted to go out. No roaring funeral fire, juniper branches catching, my skin popping and burning like stars. Instead, my hands brush against this soft fabric, this lush, cold darkness. I curl up into myself. Because I know right now cool black beads are slipping between your fingers, and the prayers your silent lips form are only for you. This is called Love Spell number 2. If you love someone who has left you, try this spell. You'll need an entire bottle of wine. Drink this out of a mug, an extra large one which reads, I heart my dog. All good love spells require libations to the goddess that is you. Do this on the night of the crescent moon. The moon, too, is only a slim piece of herself. She mourns your loss with you. But she, like you, will either become whole or reborn again soon. There will be other people. The moon, like you, is hungry. There is another name for this spell. It is to cure a bad habit. Pull 9 hairs from your own head. Make sure this hurts, but only a little. Wrap the hairs around a nail. Hammer the nail into a wall. Your pain will go away when the nail rests and your hairs fall away. The hole will remain, but like a freckle, you will forget it is there. That's all I have.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing those poems. I especially loved Love Spell number 2, which felt like a sort of like quarantine anthem. The bottle of wine and the in the mug. I'm like, yep, absolutely. So let's open the floor to other reactions than mine. Other things that you thought about while Jessica was reading, and yeah, anything that's on your mind. You're cautious unmuting, and I want to add that I think something like a love spell feels like the sort of thing that we're kind of, I hate to read our moment too much into the work that people are sharing tonight, but I'm also like find myself like grabbing books around the house that I feel like speak to our feeling right now of like, you know, stir craziness and wanting to connect with others. And I think like the spell is really a cool way of doing that. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to like the way that the spell might, maybe if it does it feel like a form to you that you're writing in, or does it feel like a sort of thing that
A little
like
bit.
I just want to know what it
like
feels like to write in.
pulling different things together and kind of like making it like an incantation kind of, while also like giving steps for like how you're gonna do something. Burials is a lot about like using witchcraft to kind of heal yourself, and I think that's where the love spells kind of come in. Because I was reading a lot of spell books at the time that I was writing it, and so it was kind of like taking like little things in order to like make something that's going to heal yourself, and I think it does kind of work for now.
Yeah, and any other folks thinking about spells or thinking about other things, other valences, and what Jessica read or shared with us?
Yeah, I wanted to like really say that I love the way that the body figures in the poems you were reading, the tactile sensations. Like they really, I've been thinking about that a lot in regards to not so much spells, but how recipes could play into poems as a form, and how they get you to like recall. To, like I don't know if you knit, but it seemed like some of the tactile things you were mentioning, it seemed to be like moving in that fashion of knitting or weaving or yeah. And I wonder if that plays in for you, that those kind of motions play into the forms of your poem.
A little bit. The first one, Atropos, is about one of the blind fates who they have like the threads that they cut when the life ends. And Atropos is the blind one who she cuts it at the end. And I was kind of thinking about like what would it be like if I were blind and like had to completely rely on just touch, because for a lot of my poems they're very visual, but for this one I was focusing on a character who is blind. So how do I make the same kind of images but for somebody who isn't able to see? So I think that's really where that one came in, with the tactile, because I originally had like colors throughout that poem, and then I realized that it didn't work given that the character couldn't see.
Yeah,
I love that as an idea.
I might have missed. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I just love that idea of like writing for the, like really considering the other and how to write for them. I just think it's brilliant, and I think it's lovely. I'm gonna like probably take this idea.
Dude,
I think it's incredible.
It's a lot of fun. It's so much
Yeah.
fun to consider how the character, she can't see at all, and just trying to write a poem for that voice was definitely hard, because a lot of my poetry is visual, and I wanted to make sure that it just worked. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, I was struck really strongly by, I don't know if it was the same poem or not, but the when you left, I did not wrap a red string around my finger, like the way that image is both visual, like the red of the string, but also very tactile. And I thought that was a really like interesting way, and it kind of connected to the, like I wrote down another phrase that was I crawl up into myself, like the way that these poems are inhabiting a kind of solitude, you know, like that, for example, a spell or any other kind of like thing that I'm going to try to do to connect with other people, or like, so I'm sort of curious if you wanted to say anything about how like solitude is working in this book, because definitely burial is like the ultimate solitude, it feels like. But
I mean, it draws a lot off of Edgar Allan Poe and Gothic horror, and it's about the end of a relationship where the one person starts to not feel like they have a voice in the relationship, and so they start speaking from the perspective of somebody who is dead. And I guess, like, that's where White Silk Lined Casket comes in. The speaker is, which that one's pretty, it's really based directly off of this one Poe short story, where the person's buried under the earth and they have no way to, like, contact anyone because they had the coffin bells up on top of the earth and they find that they don't have the string attached to their finger. And it just, I always found that really unsettling. Like, just the thought of just like suddenly waking up and you can't get out. But I guess that's the point.
Geez, on that very chilling note, any other last thoughts, last words? Like, no, please, let's go down deep into let's go 6 feet under for a minute. Any other last words, thoughts, etc. before, unfortunately, I think we're coming to our last reader in a moment. So again, that was Jessica Drake Thomas, who you can find on Twitter at iambadwitch, IAMBADWITCH. And again, a lot of what you heard is from her poetry collection Burials, which is forthcoming from Clash Books later in 2020. So thanks so much, Jessica, for being with us. That was, sorry?
October 6th.
Oh, perfect. October 6th, so right in time for Halloween, which is so perfect. Like, the timing is impeccable. As I'm speaking from, 15 or so miles from Salem, Massachusetts. So I'm like, yes, let's do that. So again, I'm really excited that unfortunately we're coming to a close of our reading. Our last reader could not be here with us live today, but she shared a beautiful recording that I'm really excited to share and maybe discuss briefly with y'all tonight. V.C. McCabe is the author of Give the Bard a Tetanus Shot from Vegetarian Alcoholic Press from 2019 and is a contributing editor of Barron Magazine. Her work has been featured in exhibits and journals worldwide, including Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library, the Minnesota Review, Poet Lore, and Entropy. If you want to find more of her work after this, you can find her website at VCMcCabe, VCMCCABE.com. So give me just one moment to queue up the recording, and I'm really excited to share these poems of VC's with you all tonight.
Hi, this is V.C. McCabe. Thank you to Kristin and Tom for inviting me to participate in this week's reading. I'll be reading poems from my debut poetry book, Give the Bard a Tetanus Shot, which was released by Vegetarian Alcoholic Press in 2019. And I'll begin with the title poem, Give the Bard a Tetanus Shot. How the hell am I supposed to write poetry? In the dirty, crowded parking lot of the local Piggly Wiggly, hunkered down and avoiding eye contact, with checkout clerks on their smoke breaks and drug dealers faking car trouble, waiting for their drop. Not to mention the zombies, high on meth, ghost-eyed and shuffle limping along, the muddied, littered riverbank over there, where the kudzu's too dry and dead to bother creeping, and late November has stripped the trees bare, revealing a monstrous eyesore in the distance. A rusted-out, corrugated metal tank, a wraith of the old abandoned water tower, which once nourished our forgotten fossil of a town. Classic European poets found their inspiration among the crumbling ruins of ancient Castlestone. New York City poets see their muse's reflection in the shiny glass of towering skyscrapers. While here I sit, in Appalachia, the point where the Bible Belt's buckle ever tightens the rust belt, surrounded by nothing but decay and desperation. Formative. The teacher lured the class with lollipops, marching them single file to the cemetery. Hunting takes so many forms, lingering like the bitter aftertaste of sour hard candy swallowed in a field of unmarked graves. Lessons in mining. In my Appalachian middle school, the teachers transformed the classrooms into a coal mining town, a Sylvan edition of Stanford's prison experiment. The rich students worked for the company, while us poor kids played the minor league. Whether that division of labor by social class was preferential treatment for the privileged or a broader lesson for all, it lent an extra sting to our respective roles in the interactive project. We miners had to crawl on our hands and knees, our necks wrapped in red bandanas, identifying pennants of our mining class and filters for our breath. Into a dark mine of cardboard boxes and blankets, a ramshackle tunnel smeared with black coal dust. The teachers let us out quickly, before our lungs and minds were overtaken by the polluted air of the makeshift mine shaft. Then they took us to the company store, doled out pieces of paper scrip, and sent us forward to barter for food with smug rich kids wielding power behind the counter. The child of a poor single mother, I was accustomed to the bitterness provoked by this lesson in mining. Choking in the cardboard coal mine reminded me of inhaling bleach fumes, my face pressed against my mother's clothes as she hugged me, my neck wrapped in her red hands, her skin raw from cleaning houses of the town's elite. Wealthy parents whose children looked down on me from their elevated posts behind the counter. The company store setup felt much like waiting with my mother at the welfare office, the script like the stamps she was given to trade for food. It made me think miners must be like my mother, parents trading hard labor and hazardous conditions, doing whatever the world requires of them to keep their children warm and well fed. And the final poem I'm reading is called Bonfires. Give us today our daily medication, and may we forgive those who trespass our property before we find our shotguns. The news is bad all the time, so why bother learning anything we don't already know? In midsummer, we witness a murder of crows cloak a dead tree in darkness. How green the grass grows on the neighbor's lawn as he pukes last night beer over the white picket fence. Gaggles of stars shoot across our bows, our furrowed brows, a warning of woes to come. From sea to shining swamp, the air we breathe is a tinderbox, and our raised torches are lit.
That again was V.C. McCabe with an incredibly beautiful variegated set of poems from her debut, which is available, let me make sure I get that right, available now from Vegetarian Alcoholic Press, called Give the Bard a Tetanus Shot. So V.C. again couldn't be here with us to answer questions, but other thoughts that people are having, connections they want to make. These poems have moved me for a long time. I'm a real big fan of V.C.'s work and could talk about it forever, but I want to open the floor to other folks first.
I really appreciated how embodied and located the poems were. They existed in a very particular landscape and locale and didn't try to hit any universality and were very self-aware. And I felt that I was in this world that was created by the poems very, very successfully.
Yeah, that's so cool to hear and think about, and I can't help but read our moment into these, and I'm thinking about how you're sort of sitting in this moment of social distancing with your memories, and the elementary school like extended sort of Fantasia sequence is just so like it hits me everywhere. of like the what did you experience in that so formative time, like that your teachers may or may not have had a part of structuring, your classmates, your socioeconomic situation, but like it's so real to process it in the here and now. And some of us are finding ourselves now at the time like where these films almost are playing in our heads of like, oh well, now you have some time to process, here it is. And I think that VC does such an amazing job of creating this episodic feeling in that moment of like, just living out that memory in such a real way. Other thoughts that people are having, things that people connected with in these poems, because again, I could talk about them forever, but I don't want to. I want to hear other voices.
I actually reviewed Give a Bard a Tetanus Shot, and what I just found throughout the whole book was like the way that VC makes kind of like this apocalyptic feeling, because there are fires, there are tornadoes, there are escaping floods, and just there's almost like a dark, like almost Vonnegut kind of like dark, ironic undertone to it. So like hearing her read those poems for the first time, it's like, I don't know, it's making me think about it in a different way. But I absolutely love the book. It's fabulous.
That's so cool. Thank you for your perspective as a reviewer of the book. And like, I feel what you're saying, because we a couple months ago in February had our Twin Peaks reading to celebrate the These Poems Are Not What They Seem anthology. And I got such a similar vibe, or I get such a similar vibe from VC's work as I get from the revival of Twin Peaks, that puts this like sort of, you don't know what the pseudo-apocalyptic image, like these characters just have inexplicable rashes or like inexplicable breaks from reality, and like you kind of begin to feel them almost as constitutive of reality for those characters. And like I think VC's poems do a really great job of that, of like it's almost if not a banality of evil, but like a banality of like, this is insane and we're just dealing with it, like the level, the exploitation, or the sort of unsettledness of the feeling of growing up in an Appalachian setting. So it's just so cool the way that, for example, on the page, it feels different than in VC's voice. And again, I can't thank VC enough for providing this recording for us within a day's notice. Like, it's such a beautiful recording. And I've talked enough. So as we enter our last minute or so of talking about VC's work, does anybody want to share another thought or connection that they have before we wrap things up for the evening?
I like what Jessica said about the apocalyptic feeling of her poetry, and I think that's something that happens in situations of poverty too, is that you kind of that constantly things are always about to fall apart, and there's this kind of uneasiness about it, in that within that culture and within that a very specific culture in Appalachia too. It's more unique and individual, but I really like that the thing Jessica said.
That's a really beautiful note to end our discussion on, the sort of like instability of all of this, and the fact that we have these small loci of stability. And for some of us, it's poetry. And so I'm really super grateful to have everybody's voices here tonight, and especially VC's. So again, that was the work we're discussing now is from VC McCabe, who you can find on Twitter at VCM Poetry. And the work that you heard is from her debut, Give the Bard a Tetanus Shot, which is available now from Vegetarian Alcoholic Press. So I know it's getting to the hour 15-ish minute mark, 13-ish minute mark, and we're at the end of our group of readers who I'm very, very grateful have taken the time to share with us their work and their thoughts about their fellow readers' work. So it's really cool to have these moments of community with y'all in this time in particular. And I just want to let folks know as we wrap up for tonight that our next reading will be next Thursday, April 16th at 9 p.m. EST. So a few slots have been claimed, but there's plenty more. It's our last, I think we'll do this similar social edition because it's so awesome to get to hear folks' thoughts about each other's work. And then after that, because unfortunately Kristin is homeschooling and I am back to remote teaching, we'll be going back to our regular schedule of the third Thursday of every month after this. But it's been really great, and we're really excited to have one more go of hearing folks' poems and thoughts about others' poems. So please get in touch if you'd like to read. And the only thing I'll do to kind of wrap things up to read one last poem. This is a poem by Liz Waldner. Again, I've been finding these books that have been just sort of comfort objects in this moment, books that weren't written in the time of pandemic, but that feel like they may have been. This is Liz Waldner's book, Little House, Big House, in parentheses, Now How I Am an American. Liz is a really singular voice. And I'm just going to read this very short poem called Gone Astray in Iowa, I-O-W-A-Y, presumably written while Liz was getting her degree at the University of Iowa. Today the Spirit House reads the Spent House. It is like that today, the evening into the waters of itself. The cornfields are God, as usual. On the highway, the pork promoters adopted. But I am not riding my bike alongside them. I am sad in my room with my poor pen pent, and I'd meant to write gold up above.